Hi to all those that have tuned in for this theory video, which is building on the previous video looking at trading blocks. Now, what we're going to be looking at in this video is the UK's relationship with the European Union. What we know is relatively recently the UK voted to leave the EU. So what we're going to be looking at here is the arguments for remaining in the European Union, as well as the arguments for leaving the European Union. I'm going to focus predominantly on the economic arguments for this, by the way. And what I'm going to ask you to do at the end of the video is to consider how you would have voted if you'd been old enough to vote in the referendum for the UK's future relationship with the European Union. So would you have voted to remain, or would you have voted to leave the European Union? Right, everyone. Now, at the moment, the EU is a trading bloc made up of 27 different countries. So the largest economy is Germany. It was then the UK in second place prior to our decision to leave the European Union, which means that France is now the second biggest economy by GDP in the European Union. Now, historically, the European Union was made up of generally Western European economies, and this would have been the likes of Germany and France. The UK joined in the 1970s, and then more recently, we've had a big swathe of East European economies that have joined the European Union. And these countries include the likes of Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and these are all former Soviet Union economies. So when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, these economies went on to adopt more free market strategies, and in recent years, they've been allowed to join the European Union. Now, let's just think really briefly about what the European Union actually is. So first of all, the EU is a free trade area. So all the member states of the European Union have free trade with other European Union members. So we're removing trade barriers between countries, and that should lead to an increase in competition between economies, increased international trade, but also more trade to be based on the theories of absolute and comparative advantage. And this should lead to not just loads of specialisation and competition, but it's going to lead to more interdependence between these different member states. Now, what the EU also has, though, is around the EU a common external tariff. And that's because the EU is not just a free trade area, but it's also a customs union. So this common external tariff around the EU means that all EU member states will impose the same tariffs on non-EU members. And these can range from as low as 5% up to 25% on certain products that might come into the EU. The most famous part is the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, which is designed to try and limit non-European Union food being sold across the EU. And that's been designed to protect the agricultural industries of the European Union. So it's a free trade area, it's also a customs union, it's also a common market. So we don't just allow the free movement of goods and services across the European Union, but we also allow the free movement of capital. So firms, individuals are free to invest anywhere across the European Union with no interference from governments. But also on top of that as well, we have the free movement of people. So people are free to move to any other EU country to live and to work within their particular economy. And that is designed to allow workers to move to where job vacancies might be or where wage rates might be higher. And that helps tackle skill gaps across the EU, but also it makes the EU labour market way more competitive. And that can allow firms to access not just more workers, but also more competitively priced labour as well. Okay, now on top of that as well, it's not just a free trade area, it's not just a customs union, it's not just a common market, it's also an economic and monetary union. So EU members will often share similar economic policies. They will adopt similar fiscal and monetary policies. Indeed, many of the members have now adopted the single currency. So the euro now is the currency used by lots of EU economies such as Germany and France and Italy, Belgium and Holland as well. And what this does, it eliminates exchange rate uncertainty when it comes to international trade between these countries. Now, to join the euro, the individual members that joined the euro had to abolish or get rid of their central bank. So the idea was when their central banks were closed down, the European Central Bank in Frankfurt in Germany was set up, and that central bank was then responsible for monetary policy for all euro members. The UK never adopted the euro, so our relationship with the EU went no further than the common market. Okay, right, now what we're going to be thinking about now then is why the UK, first of all, voted to leave the European Union. So the main arguments for Brexit. Now, before we start thinking about the arguments for Brexit, though, it's worth just sharing with you this timeline. So the UK officially left the European Union on the 31st of January 2020. It's what was called Brexit Day. And then Britain, for the rest of 2020, entered into a transition period. So we still, in effect, followed all the EU rules and regulations. We still followed all the rules and regulations of the EU, such as free trade, etc. So more or less, for your average person, it seemed no different at all. And what this meant then across 2020 was our government would negotiate with the European Union a Brexit deal, so a future trade deal with the European Union. Now, there are two options. So the UK will officially leave this transition period at the end of 2020. Now, if we leave with a deal, our new relationship would start with the EU in January 2021. If we leave with no deal, we would call that hard Brexit, and we would leave with no trade deal. And in January 2021, that would mean the UK would have to adopt the World Trade Organization rules. And that would mean that UK goods and services will be sold in Europe with tariffs placed on them, set by the World Trade Organization rules. And obviously the same rules would apply to goods imported into the UK from those EU members. Right, so you've got here not an exclusive, but a big list of arguments in favour of leaving the European Union. I've not put these in any particular order in terms of the biggest or the least significant first. It's just a list of different arguments that you might want to use. Now, the first one is new trade deals. Because the UK was part of the customs union of the EU, it meant that we weren't independent when it came to negotiating trade deals with non-EU members. So Britain couldn't, for example, go to Japan or China or Australia and negotiate bilateral trade deals. The customs union meant that the UK had to do this through the European Union. So in many ways, we had no sovereignty to create trade deals which benefited the UK economy. Now, clearly leaving the European Union would free up the UK to go across the world and negotiate these bilateral trade deals. And the argument would be that the UK is still a very large economy across the world, and we've got to assume that lots of countries across the world would want a trade deal with the UK economy. It would benefit both economies entering into that trade agreement. Now, the next one, the EU is renowned for introducing lots of very, very complex laws and regulations. And these create lots and lots of additional costs for businesses in the UK. I think it was Michael Gove that during the Brexit campaign argued that these rules and regulations were costing UK businesses £600 million per week to comply with. So the logic would be if the UK is free from the EU, we're now able to set laws and regulations which benefit our businesses and our people. Further to that as well, a condition of being part of the EU, and it's designed to promote stability, is that there's a certain limit to what you can do with monetary and fiscal policy. So there are technical limits on how big national debts can get. Well, if we're free from them EU rules and regulations, then we've got complete sovereignty over our monetary and fiscal policy. So we can do, again, things that will benefit our people, free from interference from the European Union. Now, the next one, you might remember being a young kid seeing a picture of a bus going around the country with £350 million per week is what being part of the EU costs us. Well, it is true. The UK had to make a membership contribution. So £350 million per week would leave the UK taxpayer's pocket and go towards the European Union to use for fiscal policy at EU level. So that would then be used to redistribute money from richer countries like the UK to poorer members. It would be used to support macro stability in different countries across the EU. But in effect, what it meant was that £350 million per week was leaving the UK economy to go into the EU's pocket. Now, it's worth noting, though, that we did get some of this money back. So some of this will come back towards regenerate poor areas across the UK to support macro stability in the UK economy as well. But overall, the UK did have an overall budget deficit with the EU. So in other words, we were sending more money over to them than what we were getting back from the EU. So we were a net contributor to the EU budget. So the logic would be if we can no longer be part of the EU, then we no longer send all this tax money over to the EU every single week. And that money can therefore be used to benefit the UK economy rather than benefiting other EU members. Now, the next one, leaving the EU will mean that we're no longer part of the customs union. So at the moment, being part of the EU means that UK, when we import goods from non-EU members, we have to pay tariffs to get those goods into the UK. And these can range from 5% all the way up to 25%. So to give you an example, lots of food products that come into the UK from non-EU countries have got a tariff of over 25%. Other ideas, footwear is a tariff of 10%. So the logic would be that if we're no longer part of the customs union and we can strike up free trade deals across the world, then potentially we can import things at lower prices. Well, that would reduce the cost of living for the millions of households across the economy. You'd be able to buy things cheaper. It would ease cost-push inflation. And also, if your imports are cheaper, that would lead to an improvement in your terms of trade potentially as well. And that could lead to a much significant increase in living standards across the country. Now, the next one is a very controversial one. And this is a big reason why a lot of people did vote to leave the European Union. They were against the free movement of labour. And the logic was if you've got potential, and by the way, this statistic is true here, our population grows by 5 million people per decade. That's the equivalent of 5 extra Birminghams every single decade. Now, lots of these people do come from the European Union because of the free movement of labour. You've got people that flood into the UK economy for potentially better living standards, higher wage rates, better job opportunities. Now, when these people move into the UK economy, they put a strain on labour markets. That can create benefits for firms such as cheaper workers, more workers, better skilled workers. But it means for UK citizens, they're now competing with EU immigrants for jobs in the UK. And that can bring down wage rates, make it more difficult to get jobs in the first place. But also, it's the strain this places on UK infrastructure. This large influx of people creates problems in the housing market. So that leads to a big growth in demand for rental properties, buying property, and pushes up housing costs. In the UK, we've already got a lack of housing as it is. So a big influx of migrant labour will make that problem even worse. You've got all these extra people coming into the UK that demand healthcare. So you've got the strain on the National Health Service because they're going to get the same entitlement to what British citizens have got. And you've got impacts on transport as well. You know, all these extra people travelling on the road networks, on public transport. So you could argue the UK lacks the capacity to deal with that volume of immigrants year after year. Now, the next one, an interesting one. We as a country export more to non-EU nations than we do the EU. So I think off the top of my head, roughly 45% of our exports go to the EU. Well, the logic would be, are we not therefore better off negotiating trade deals with non-EU members? Maybe that's a better thing for the UK to be looking at when we're no longer part of the customs union and focusing on the European Union. Now, overall as well, the UK actually runs a trade surplus with the rest of the world, but we've got a trade deficit with the EU. So maybe moving away from the EU could actually overall improve our trade performance. That could make reducing our current account deficit hopefully a simpler task than what it is at the moment. Now, further to that one as well, and building on the previous one, the EU, it is still technically the world's biggest single trading bloc across the world, the biggest single market there is. 350 million people or so of generally high income people buying goods and services. The EU is losing power. year after year, its share of global GDP is falling. So many would argue the EU is the past. We need to be looking towards more emerging markets such as China and India. Maybe, building up our trade deals with America instead and moving away from reliance on the EU for international trade. But it's also worth noting as well that you don't have to be in the EU to trade with the EU. So America and China, for example, they do lots of trade with the EU. Well, they're not part of it. So why should our trade deals, our trade relationship end with the EU after Brexit? There's no reason why it needs to. Now, it's also worth noting as well that 80% of international trade is completed by multinational corporations as part of the global supply chain. And the EU have already come out and committed themselves to ensuring that these firms will not be affected by Brexit. So very limited amounts of our trade will be affected by a no-deal Brexit anyway. And overall, everyone, the biggest argument a lot of people give is sovereignty. So that idea of freedom to create not just their own trade deals across the world, but rules and regulations which benefit the UK economy. Having an immigration policy which it will hopefully allow skilled workers to move into the UK or to fill labour shortages, but it's not going to be an open door immigration policy. We can decide who comes here, how many people come here year after year. Right, anyway, moving on to the arguments for Remain. And again, these were in no particular order. It's just a few things that came into my mind when I was presented with the arguments for Leave and Remain during the referendum. Now, the top one, 45% of our exports are to the EU. Well, if we're operating outside of the customs union, which is possible if we have a hard or a no-deal Brexit, and that will mean that 45% of our exports will suddenly have tariff placed on them by EU members. And that could mean exports start to dry up. So EU might start buying less of our goods and services. That could create lots of unemployment in the UK. And also as well, you've got to remember that that will be replicated as well. Not only would we have to pay tariffs on goods being exported to the EU, which would lower demand, those taxes would be applied to goods coming into the UK from the EU. And that could push up price levels of lots of goods and services as well. Now, another argument for Remain would be to increase international power. The UK, as part of the world's biggest single market, has got an enhanced voice on the international stage. Big countries across the world are more likely to want a trade deal with the UK as part of the EU, as the UK is not part of the EU. So the idea would be that if you've got lots of economies in your trading bloc, it enhances your reputation on the global stage. Now, further to that as well, being part of the EU means that the UK still benefits from all those multilateral trade deals that the EU has built up with other large economies across the world. By leaving the EU, we are no longer part of these trade deals. And that would mean not only would trade to the EU be affected, but our trade with the rest of the world would also be affected. And that could mean that tariffs are placed on British goods, not just going to the EU, but to many other countries across the world. So leaving means the UK has got to go across the world and strike new trade deals with different countries across the world. Now, there's a good chance, well, those trade deals that we negotiate on our own as the UK will not be as good as the ones that we had when we were part of the European Union. So it's not just going to affect our trade with Europe, but with the rest of the world as well. Now, further to that as well, these rules and regulations that apparently cost UK firms a lot of money, they also create huge benefits for the UK economy. These regulations protect food standards, they protect people, workers' rights. But what they also do as well, they ensure that we have a standardized production method across the EU. And that means that when we trade goods with Europe, we can confirm that our goods comply with European standards. Well, if we start to create our own rules and regulations, the EU might not want to buy them products. This might then open up non-tariff barriers, which makes it more difficult for us to trade our goods inside the European Union. We've also got to think about the benefits of the free movement of labour. Now, I've put down here, immigration is important. Those immigrants that come into the UK from the EU, they fill skill gaps, they become doctors, they become nurses, they become engineers, they work in factories. Well, we need them people coming in. to keep our economy skilled and make sure our human capital is constantly moving in the right direction to support better potential growth. Further to that as well, there are many professions such as agriculture, care work, where if it wasn't for migrant labour, then that industry would collapse. Well, if we're no longer allowing the free movement of people, it might become more difficult for firms to access the workers they need to remain competitive. It's also worth noting, though, as well, that immigration, although it's important EU immigration into the UK, we have a heck of a lot of people that come into the UK from non-EU member states. So India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and other countries across the world. Well, not being part of the EU will not stop that immigration. So we're still going to get a lot of immigration anyway. Now, the next point, many multinational corporations, when they make big investments in the UK, such as car manufacturers, big financial firms, they've done so on the back of free trade with the European Union. So big Japanese, South Korean car manufacturers that operate in the UK, they want to export them cars to the European Union. Well, there's a good chance that if Britain leaves the EU with no trade deal in place, these big firms might relocate production into Europe to be inside the European Union again. Well, that means you're going to get lots of job losses in the UK, and that big loss of investment will be a drag on our GDP performance. And it could also then mean that in the future, less firms will want to invest in the UK. They want to be inside the EU. Now, next point as well, Norway is not part of the EU. But to have a trade deal with the EU, it has to follow the vast majority of EU rules and regulations anyway. But what makes it more difficult for Norway, because they're not in the EU, they have no say in what these rules and regulations will be. So if the UK was to leave, we might be forced to adopt a Norwegian model. So we might be given preferential access to European markets for our goods and services. But the problem is we've still got to then follow lots of EU rules and regulations anyway. Now, when you're in the EU, we can be part of the negotiation and create rules and regulations that benefit us. Well, leaving the EU will suddenly mean that we've got no say in these rules anymore. So there's less chance that they'll benefit UK firms if you've got no involvement in the creation of these rules. Now, next one, we've also got to bear in mind that the customs union, it protects UK firms from low-cost competitors across the world. Well, suddenly, if we're no longer part of the customs union, it means that our firms might not be protected by the benefits of the customs union, and it might lead to more cheap imports flooding into the UK economy from non-EU members, and that could lead to, a loss of industries across the UK economy and a bigger trade deficit. Now, the last one, when we were looking at the arguments for Brexit or leaving the EU, one of the things that I mentioned was the £350 million a week fee for being part of the EU. Well, that comes to less than 1% of GDP. So £350 million a week might sound a lot of money, especially when you aggregate it up across a whole year. But when you compare it to the overall size of the UK economy, it's tiny. So when you think about it, less than 1% of GDP, that's less than 1p in every pound that we generate as a country will go towards the EU budget. Then we've got to bear in mind as well that we then get a rebate on that. Some money will come back into the UK from the EU. Further to this, the benefits that the EU is set to create in terms of access to export markets, access to the skilled labour, the multilateral trade deals, the MNC investment, the arguments are the benefits far exceed this fee. So there might be a fee to join, but the benefits it creates far exceed the cost. So that membership fee almost more or less pays for itself. Right, guys, now what I've tried to do is to present you with all of the main arguments, or a vast majority of the big arguments anyway. I don't want to influence your decision here. Really, it's about what you think. What I would now like you to do is to make a value judgment. So please write down your answer to this question. If you'd have been able to vote in the referendum, how would you have voted? But before you can come to that decision, you've got to be thinking about, to you, what are the main benefits of leaving the EU? What are the benefits of remaining inside the European Union? Now, once you've then thought about the arguments for and against, you can now make a value judgment. Based on the evidence that you've been presented with, how would you have voted and why would you have voted in that way? So guys, hit pause, jot down these questions and think about how you would have voted. But before you do that, what to you were the main reasons for leaving? What were the main reasons for remaining? And then finally, how would you have voted? Very, very difficult question, but give it a go, please. Right, thank you very much.